Today we're looking at something that is a genuine revolution happening right now in critical care, a real trauma resuscitation paradigm shift.
It really is.
For decades, the mantra has been airway, breathing, circulation, classic ABC sequence. But the evidence is now so compelling that for a specific high-risk patient, that order is being flipped.
And that's the core of this discussion. We're talking about patients with massive, immediate, life-threatening blood loss, what we call exsanguinating injuries.
Right.
For this group, the sequence is now circulation, airway, breathing, or CAB. And this shift isn't just a theory. It's driven by outcomes, by the need to focus every single second on hemorrhage control.
I think we need to establish just how big a change this is. The ABCs were fundamental, right? Ingrained in everyone. So what changed? Why challenge something that's been doctoring for decades?
Well, we finally had to acknowledge that the ABC protocol, it was originally designed for cardiac arrest. That's a primary oxygenation failure. Hemorrhagic shock, where the patient is bleeding out, that's a primary perfusion failure. If you don't have blood volume, you don't have a pump.
Yeah.
And the numbers, the cold, hard numbers show hemorrhage is the leading cause of preventable trauma death, almost 40% worldwide. Our job is to get rid of that 40%.
So the crisis we're solving is that preventable death from blood loss. Let's look at the mechanism. Why is sticking to that old approach, securing the airway first, why is that so dangerous for a patient who's lost a massive amount of blood?
It creates what we sometimes call a double hit. First, you have to think about what the body is doing on its own. It's compensating. When you lose blood, your body dumps massive amounts of catecholamines adrenaline, and that causes this powerful systemic vasoconstriction. It's a defense mechanism, squeezing the vessels to keep what little blood is left in the core, to perfuse the heart and brain.
It's the body's last-ditch effort to survive, and we come along and stop that.
Exactly. The induction medications we use for intubation, even in tiny doses, they immediately disrupt that vasoconstriction. The vessels relax, the core pressure just plummets, and the little volume they had is suddenly not enough. That's strike one.
And strike two is the ventilator itself, the positive pressure.
Yes. When you start positive pressure ventilation, you're forcing air into the chest, which increases the pressure in there.
Right.
And that physical pressure squeezes the big vessels, specifically the vena cava, that are returning blood to the heart. It just crushes the preload. It's like trying to run a pump when the hose is crimped and the tank is almost empty. The heart can just collapse. You risk immediate cardiac arrest.
Okay, so you have a trauma patient, massive blood loss, their mental status is depressed. Let's say a Glasgow Coma Scale score of 6. Traditionally, that's an indication for intubation. How do we rethink that?
You have to remember the cause. A depressed GCS in this scenario is very often because of inadequate cerebral perfusion. The brain is starving because there isn't enough volume circulating. It's not necessarily a primary head injury.
That's a huge clinical dilemma, though. If we delay intubation and focus on circulation, what about the risk of aspiration or the airway collapsing?
And that is the exact friction point, that the CIB approach addresses.
Yeah.
We're making a calculated risk assessment. The certainty is that intubating a profoundly hypovolemic patient almost guarantees cardiovascular collapse.
Wow.
If we prioritize circulation, get blood back into the system, we often see that GCS score just shoot up. The patient starts to wake up because their brain is getting perfused again. And we may have completely avoided the hemodynamic disaster of intubation. We're trading a theoretical risk for an immediate, very high probability of circulatory arrest.
Let's move into that C's phase then, circulation. If we've put volume above everything else, what are we putting into the patient? What's the absolute priority?
The priority is hemostatic resuscitation, meaning we're using products that actually stop the bleeding and restore clotting. Whole blood, whenever it's available, should be the first-line fluid.
Why whole blood specifically?
Because it's physiologically what the patient lost. It has red cells for oxygen, plasma for clotting factors, and platelets, all in one bag.
And in places where whole blood isn't on the shelf, which is pretty common, what's the balance ratio we should be using?
The strong recommendation is a balanced transfusion. You're giving red blood cells, plasma, and platelets in a specific 1-to-1-to-1 ratio.
1-to-1-to-1?
Yes, and that's so important. You're not just replacing oxygen carriers with red cells. You have to replace the coagulation factors that were lost. Maintaining that balance is how you fight that vicious cycle of trauma.
On that note, what kind of fluid do we need to actively avoid in that initial phase?
We have to be really strict about avoiding the excessive use of crystalloids, things like normal saline or lactated ringers.
But they add volume, right?
They do, but it's empty volume. They have no oxygen carriers, no clotting factors. All they do is contribute to hemodilution, basically thinning out the patient's remaining blood, washing out the few clotting factors they have left, which just makes the bleeding worse.
That sounds like a fast track to the lethal triad.
It is. The lethal triad: hypothermia, coagulopathy, and acidosis. Crystalloids make coagulopathy and acidosis worse. Everything we do in the CAB approach is designed to reverse that triad, not contribute to it.
Okay, what if intubation just can't be avoided? Maybe there's severe facial trauma or the airway is about to close. If we have to do it in that critically hypovolemic state, what medications are we choosing?
Anesthetic choice here is literally life or death.
Yeah.
You have to pick drugs with the lowest cardiovascular impact. Ketamine or etomidate are preferred because they tend to maintain that sympathetic tone.
And what do we avoid?
You absolutely have to avoid agents like propofol. It is a potent vasodilator. It will drop their blood pressure off a cliff, guaranteeing catastrophic hypotension. And you use the lowest possible dose of paralytics. Ideally, you start the blood products before you even push the induction drugs. Give them a buffer.
And this whole philosophy, it's not just an ER decision, is it? It's a whole continuum of care. How does CAB start with the very first responder in the field?
It starts with immediate, aggressive hemorrhage control. Circulation in the field means physical control first.
Okay.
That's rapid application of extremity tourniquets for any limb injury. It's using junctional hemorrhage devices for those tricky spots where limbs meet the torso, the groin, the armpit. And it's deep, effective wound packing. You have to stop the leak first.
And for those longer transports or for severe bleeding inside the torso that you can't just press on, what's the advanced technique for that?
That's where you get into REBOA, resuscitative endovascular balloon occlusion of the aorta.
It's essentially an internal tourniquet.
That's a perfect way to put it. A catheter goes in, usually through the femoral artery, and a balloon is inflated in the aorta to block blood flow to the lower bleeding part of the body. It centralizes all the remaining volume to the heart and the brain, and it buys you a critical window of time to get to a surgeon.
So when the patient finally gets to the operating room with this massive bleeding, the surgical mindset has to be different too, right?
Completely different. It's all about damage control surgery. Time is the enemy. The surgeon's only goal is swift, immediate control of the bleeding. Ligating, packing, shunting, whatever is fastest.
So no long, complex repairs.
Absolutely not. The definitive, meticulous reconstruction is deferred. The patient is too cold, too acidotic, and too coagulopathic for that. The surgeon gets in, stops the bleeding with temporary measures, and gets the patient out to the ICU for resuscitation. Once they're stable, once that triad is reversed, then they go back for the final operation.
What about interventional radiology? How does that fit into this paradigm?
That's a great point. IR procedures, like embolizing a bleeding vessel, are often perfect for the circulation-first philosophy. When it's feasible, you can do these interventions with deep sedation and analgesia and completely avoid intubation and positive pressure. You're fixing the leak without disrupting the body's own compensatory mechanisms.
Now, this shift is especially striking when we talk about kids. Their physiology is just so different. Why are children so vulnerable to the risks of early intubation?
Children are, they're masters of compensation. They have much more robust vasoconstriction than adults, so they can maintain a normal blood pressure for a very long time, even while they're bleeding out.
So hypotension is a very, very late sign.
It is the final sign. It's not a warning, it's imminent collapse. They're often in profound shock by the time their blood pressure finally drops. And because their compensation is so good, when it fails catastrophically. That double hit of induction drugs and positive pressure can push them right over the edge.
What does the data tell us about transfusion for kids who need massive transfusions?
The data is pretty clear. Achieving a plasma to red blood cell ratio of at least 1 to 2 is associated with a 51% reduction in 24-hour mortality.
A 51% reduction, that's huge.
It's massive. It just underscores how important it is to replace those clotting factors along with the red cells.
And we talked about avoiding crystalloids in adults. Is there a specific limit for kids?
Yes, and the standard is very precise. You limit crystalloid resuscitation to a single 20 milliliter per kilogram bolus. That's it. If that one bolus doesn't work, you must transition immediately to blood products. Any more crystalloid just makes them colder and more diluted, and they tolerate that extremely poorly.
Okay, so let's circle back to the A and B now that we've prioritized C. If we're delaying the advanced airway step, how do we make sure the patient is actually, getting oxygen?
We use simpler, less invasive tools. You maintain oxygenation with passive oxygen, like a non-rebreather mask or maybe a supraglottic airway. These don't require paralyzing the patient. You're keeping oxygen flowing while the volume is being restored, and you do not use paralytics until that volume is optimized.
And once you do intubate and you have to start positive pressure ventilation, the breathing part, is there a specific strategy to minimize that negative impact on circulation?
Yes, you have to use a lung protective strategy,
Yeah.
specifically low tidal volumes, smaller breaths. Low tidal volumes mean lower peak airway pressures, and that reduces the physical squeeze on the vena cava. The less pressure in the chest, the more easily blood can get back to the heart. It all comes back to prioritizing perfusion, even after the tube is in.
This philosophy, it touches every specialty, from the medic in the field to the surgeon in the OR. So what's the final takeaway on making this work system-wide?
I think the key word is synchronization. CAB is a multidisciplinary resuscitation bundle. It requires effective, standardized communication across EMS, the emergency department, trauma surgery, anesthesia. Every single team member has to understand that every decision, from which drug you pick to your vent settings, it all has to be relentlessly focused on minimizing blood loss and preserving perfusion.
The central shift is clear then. Hemorrhage control and early balanced blood product resuscitation. That 1-to-1-to-1 ratio that has to come before advanced airway management in the patient who is actively bleeding out. That's a profound change.
It is. And, the most valuable knowledge is the knowledge you actually apply. This CAD paradigm directly challenges the rigid protocol so many of us learned. It forces you to ask the question, how often has the decision to intubate in your trauma bay been dictated by a score, rather than a dynamic, real-time assessment of whether the real problem is a lack of oxygen or lack of volume? Understanding that difference, that's how we maximize survival.
Thinking about that physiological difference is what gives you the power to truly optimize resuscitation. We hope you can put this knowledge to use. Until next time.